The most widely published book in human history reveals that we are created in the image of God. Throughout our human journey, each encounter is an opportunity to see the shared humanity in ourselves and others. Regardless of one's views on religion, each experience and each story weaves us together towards a common path. A path of transformation, a process of growth and understanding, a recognition that, at our core, we share a common destiny. What does the search for truth really mean in our lives? How can we find a sense of unity in a world so diverse and divided? As we reflect on these questions, we start to uncover a fundamental connection that binds us all beyond our differences. Welcome to Created in the Image of God, Building Vibrant Communities, with our host, Wade Franson. Tonight's episode is Biblical Leadership in a Modern World.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to tonight's show. I have a special guest in the studio who is a former Fortune 500 CEO who had a religious awakening while in Budapest years ago and has practiced a Bible-based style of leadership ever since. In a world divided and suffering from extremes of wealth and poverty, I thought the time was right to have a former Fortune 500 CEO on the show, diving deep into the parables of Jesus and looking at their modern application. So welcome to the studio, Tom Kereszti.
Wade, thanks for having me.
It is my pleasure. I hear you're hailing from out in San Diego, where the weather is probably a balmy 75 degrees, perfect. That's the place where Dr. Seuss spent a lot of his time, and those magnificently strange trees actually do exist and grow out there where you're from.
Yeah, I mean, I hope there's no purgatory because right now, I mean, one step before heaven, I don't want to leave. And if I end up in purgatory, that would really be bad before I get to heaven.
Yeah.
This is a nice place to be right now.
Well, and in the in the northern hemisphere, it's spring and life is exploding outside my window here. It's a wonderful time of year, and I'm really pleased to have you here. We've been working on getting you here to have this show now for a couple of months, I think, and we have a lot to talk about. What we always do on this show is dive first into who you are, right? So spend a few minutes telling us about your parents, the environment you grew up in. What are the forces that shaped you in your early life?
Well, that's a great question. You asked that question, and I've asked that question from several people, and they really can't answer that. They don't know who they are. So, today where I am is I'm a servant leader. That's really what defines me. How I got here has been, a long path up and down. I call life a sine wave. You got some peaks and you some valleys, and your heartbeat is sine wave. Your breathing is a sine wave, so it's everything up and down. And I've had plenty of peaks and I had plenty of valleys, but I am where I am. I'm pretty confident on who I am, and that's great. Now, how did I get here? I probably lived about half my life in the U.S. and I probably half my life outside the U.S. So I do have, I guess, a different perspective, as my kids also have a different perspective on life in the U.S. I have more of a global perspective, and I don't think it's a bias one way or another. It's just a different way of looking at it because I've seen a lot.
Well, I think when you have a diverse set of experiences like that, it helps reduce your bias, right? It helps you understand different sides of different facets of the diamond, right? But I am curious though. So, where were your parents from? Were they born in the U.S.? Were they immigrants? What were those early formative years like for you?
I'm a first generation immigrant. I was born in Budapest. So,
oh, really?
Yeah, I was about 12 when I hit the United States, and I didn't speak a word of English. It was kind of fun. I'm an extroverted kid. I was looking out the window. I saw a bunch of guys playing outside in the street. So I said, let me go out and say hello. And they could see that I couldn't speak English. So I proudly came home about 2 hours later and said, I learned an English word. What was that, Tom? shit.
Yeah,
So
that's
Rambach just taught me my first English word, and that was, that's what it was of. That's what they taught me. So I
no,
didn't know
that's
any better, but
I can affirm that. I went to Sweden when I was 9 and didn't speak a word of Swedish, and those are the first words that you learn, because that's the ones they want to share with you, and those are the words they wanted to know from me as well, right? They weren't getting that in their fourth grade English class at school, right? So, well, I guess I never caught that before in our early conversation. So the Hungarian language is a difficult one, right? And it's only spoken in Hungary, and it's the I forget what they call it, but it's Hungarian, Finnish, and Estonian, right? Those are like the only family of languages in that particular language family, right? So it's not really spoken by
well,
a lot of people.
theoretically, yes, but I had some Finnish friends, and when they spoke Finnish and I spoke Hungarian, nobody understood the other one. So I think the root of the language, I guess, they say that is it's the same root of the language, but if we speak to each
Right.
other, nobody would understand it.
No, absolutely. It's a family of languages, but they're very distinct, and basically it's not like Swedish, Norwegian, and Danish where you can kind of understand each other.
Well, we're very unique. Hungarians are very unique. Like we're in the center of Europe, and we're surrounded by Germanics, Slavics, Romance languages. So we have all these countries all around us, and then there's Hungarians. So somebody joked, they said, there's a nuclear holocaust, there's two things that will survive: cockroaches and Hungarians.
Wow. So speaking though of that language and that geography, what year did you not I'm not trying to find out how old you were, but I assume then that you had some experience behind the Iron Curtain, right? Under Soviet dominated Hungary. And Hungary was one of the first countries to open up and begin to introduce Western style economic ideas, right? I remember when I was in East Germany, before the wall came down. I was living in Germany. I was actually able to pass myself off as a German, even though I'm an American, in East Germany. And I met these two girls, and we had a good time. And they were saying, "Well, we should get together for vacation." And for them, Lake Balaton, right? That was the Bahamas or something, right? That was where you went to get away and to go on vacation, because Hungary was viewed as a much freer country, even within the Soviet orbit. Do you have any thoughts on that coming out of the Soviet Union to the United States?
Beautiful Lake Balaton. I've been there many times, and you're right. It was where East and West met, because it was relatively easy for Westerners to get into Hungary, and it was also relatively easy for Eastern Europeans to get there. So they used to joke that the West Germans and the East Germans used to come to Hungary to meet, because that's where they could meet. So I've got a lot of great memories from communism. Also, when I went back there, just as the Iron Curtain fell, there was still a lot of habits and residue from communism when I went back there in '91. So lots of stories from 0 to 12 under communism, and then probably for about 2-3 years when I went back there, including some of the stuff. I mean, I remember that some people couldn't go to a church wedding, or they didn't want to go to a church wedding, because going to church was permitted, but it was frowned upon. So if you wanted to get ahead in the communist regime, then you really couldn't be open about your faith. That was one of the, you can't worship the Lord and worship communism at the same time. So they made you choose. And although faith was, permitted, because I went to Catholic church when I was a little kid there. I was baptized as a child in the Catholic church, and my mom and my grandma went to Reformed churches. So we didn't adhere to that, but a lot of my cousins and those relatives would not even go to a church for a wedding, because that was frowned upon.
Yep. Further revealing my age, when I was a young man, one of the first major business experiences, you might say, that I had was working for a religious nonprofit, in which I was the director of a festival in which 180 people were brought into communist Poland in 1985, in which we were working with Pol Orbis, the tourist agency. And they allowed it because they wanted the valuta, right, the Western currency, because there was economic struggle. This was a few years before that American President Reagan said, "Mr. Gorbachev, tear down this wall," right? And the wall came tumbling down. But they were under economic pressure. The system was failing. And so they allowed us to come in and worship. And the reason we did that was exactly to get the East Germans out of Germany to come worship with us in, well, we were doing this in Czechoslovakia first, and then now in Poland as well, because we were able to go and worship. And this was an 8-day festival, right? We celebrated it in the fall. And the East Germans were able to come to Czechoslovakia, but the Czechoslovakian members of our church were not allowed to worship with us. So we had to do the same thing in Poland, because the East Germans could get a visa to go to Czechoslovakia, and the Czechoslovakian members had to get a visa to go to Poland. The government tourist agencies would allow us to worship with communist members, but not in their own country. A little bit of a wormhole that we created. And it was very exciting to be doing this, because it was technically illegal, but it was sanctioned by those government tourist agencies. So tell us.
I had some. Go ahead. I was just going to comment really quickly. We met some really good friends when we were living in Prague, the Tedders, and they were worship leaders, and they happened to be also a worship leader at a particular church they went to. And, we've been following them, this is now 30, 40 years later, but they did a stint in China. And wow. Literally in China, they had underground churches. I mean, they led worship in underground churches. There was, they witnessed firsthand persecution of individuals that were in church. So, I mean, us in the United States, to experience our faith and to exercise our faith, we are so blessed and we are so fortunate, because in many parts of the world, still today, Christians are persecuted. In some parts of the world, they're killed, just for their faith and their beliefs. So we're extremely fortunate.
And for some reason, there's not enough press on this, right? For some reason, this is not being brought enough, in my opinion, to the attention of the general public, that this kind of religious persecution is still going on. But tell us now a little bit about your own conversion experience, because in our earlier conversations, you shared you were not particularly religious. You certainly weren't trying to incorporate biblical principles in your leadership style until an event in Hungary. Tell us about that.
Yeah, I heard this terminology just a little while ago, CEO Christians, which basically means Christmas, Easter only. So I was, well, maybe not that bad, but, I was in a Catholic church, and, if you've been to, and I don't want to knock Catholicism, that's just, one sect of Christianity, but there was probably maybe 2 priests while I was in the Catholic church where, I would walk out of Sunday service and say, "Oh, that was pretty cool. That was a great homily." I kind of understood that, but 90% of that time, you look around the pews and you see people falling asleep, and I walk out after that 20 minutes, excuse me, the homily, and said, "I don't know what that was about." So, I was, in that phase, I really didn't read the book. I read the Bible. I, went to church because it was the right thing to do. I was brought up as a young kid going to church. So I said, okay, well, I'm doing it as an adult because I did it as a kid. I guess it's the right thing to do. But like I said, not every Sunday. And certainly I was not plugged into a church where, I was part of the church. And I think the statistics, I'm not exactly sure of the exact statistic, but it's about like 15-20% of a congregation is actually actively involved in the church in small groups and in other parts of the church, and 80% is just come and go on Sunday. So I was like the come and go guy on a Sunday, and not every Sunday. And then God said, "I think, Tom, you need a paradigm shift." So in in about 94, 95, he knocked me upside down the head, and everything that I valued, which was my work and my career, came crashing down. And I said, look, this is not really where I should be. And there was a wonderful guy at that time. We were going to, believe it or not, a Southern Baptist church in Budapest, and Southern Baptists, I guess, were very, very active as missionaries in Eastern Europe at the time. And Bob, this really gentle giant, just a wonderful man. So I sat with him, and I just accepted the Lord as an adult at that time, in about 94, 95. And that's when my light went on. I said, look, it's up to that point, it was about me. And at that time, the light went on. I said, okay, well, I got to have a paradigm shift. It can't be about me. It's got to be about something much bigger than me. And that's the walk I've been doing since 95.
Wonderful. Well, we're going to take a quick commercial break to highlight your work. And when we come back, we're going to dig into that. We're going to look at some of the parables of Jesus. I see we have at least one of our Baha'i friends here from the Clearwater channel, or a couple of them. We're going to talk about extremes of wealth and poverty, and the role of a CEO and society and business in how to navigate the difference between God and mammon, as it's called in the Bible. Don't go anywhere. We'll be right back with more of Tom Kereszti on Created in the Image of God.
What is your roadmap to success? How do you know the road ahead when you have never been there yourself? In my Fortune 500 journey to the C-suite and beyond, I've had many wins and failures as an executive and as a human being. And by the way, it's okay to fail. It's part of growing to be successful. Have you ever wondered what separates you from the most successful business leaders in the world? By reflecting on and analyzing my career, I was able to boil the reasons behind my successful achievements down to 4 key principles. I also noticed that successful leaders and successful companies share in following these same 4 principles. This gave me the inspiration for my new book, C-Suite and Beyond, and the 4 keys to leadership success. If you let these 4 keys guide your life, you will be led to success in your personal life and in business. Alternatively, if you find one or more of these keys missing, you may face difficult trials. C-Suite and Beyond is a lifetime of my and other leaders' stories on the front line as an international executive, husband, and father. If you're a C-level executive or just aspiring to be one, this book will empower you to become a better leader. But wait, I have an even better idea. I love working with leaders of small to mid-sized companies and helping improve their performance through my workshop, strategy sessions, keynotes, or executive coaching. So let's work together to make you and your company even more successful. So you can choose to do nothing and life remains as is. Or you can choose to contact me for a complimentary consultation to see how I can help you raise your level of success and achieve significance. Thank you and God bless.
Welcome back to Creating in the Image of God. We're talking with Tom Kereszti about Bible-based leadership. So Tom, let's go back a couple thousand years and let's look at what Jesus had to say about the material success and how he wanted his disciples and his followers to look at, perceive, and understand this basic need in life to work, to produce, to deliver good results for oneself and for others, right? So there are a whole host of parables, and you and I talked about some of them. Let's just start with this one famous comment or statement: no servant can serve 2 masters, for either he will hate the one and love the other. You talked about serving God in communism, and there was a problem there. But here in the West, one might say, well, communism was at least an effort to try to get away from materialism. You know, personally, I think it was obviously a failed effort and a deception of true spiritual and even material values. But one might say, and I've heard this criticism, well, capitalism is just greed amplified, right? And a chase after material wealth is evil. And this statement here is used to make that case. No servant can serve two masters, for either he will hate the one and love the other, or he will be loyal to that other one and despise the other one. You cannot serve God and mammon. And mammon is an old King James term. It basically means material wealth, material pursuits, the goods of this world. Tom, what's your take on this statement of Jesus?
Well, Jesus was, always provocative, so he had provocative ideas. If I translate that into, I guess, my life or modern world, and that's really all I can talk about. There's nothing wrong with success. Success is not the goal. Success is the result of what you've done, right? I think companies have profit and loss statements and balance sheets, and what happens is, people say, I have to make so much profit, so I have to make so much sales. But if that's your goal, that's a bad goal. You probably fail at that. I think, something like a profit and loss statement or a balance sheet is really a measure of how well you're running your business. It's a result. So I think success is always also defined the same way. It's a result of how you live your life. And success can be really defined so many ways for different people. Your success may be healthy living. Your success may be, a big house and a white picket fence. But maybe, I think, Steve Jobs, as successful as he was, his health wasn't a success. I had my first CEO when I worked for Colgate-Palmolive, Rugal Mark. Fantastic leader of a company. He, I think it was like 14 consecutive quarters that he delivered numbers to Wall Street. Yet he lost his son to a heroin overdose. So was he successful? I don't know. I don't know how you define success. I define success as today to be a servant leader, and I add value to people. That's there's three questions I always tell people. Answer who are you, what are you passionate about, what you love to do, and what are you good at. I saw Diana, my friend, is in part of the chats, and she complimented me a while back. She said, Tom is so good at adding value to people. Well, I do that because I love doing it. I love making people better. I love making companies better, and that's what defines me. That's what defines me as success. It's not money. Right? It's basically adding value to people, making people better, and serving people. That's, I'm a servant leader. So that's how I define my success. Now, as a byproduct of that, if I have financial gain, great. Right? If I don't have financial gain, I can't really bless others. I mean, if I don't have money, I can't tithe, right? Everybody, should tithe, but the impact of your tithe, I mean, if you're tithing and your tithe is $10, the impact of $10 is not as great as impact of $100,000. So there's nothing wrong with success, also financial, monetary gain, if you use it right.
Thank you. Well said. We're going to dive a little bit deeper into this parable here in a couple of minutes, because what we read was the concluding statement in the book of Luke, the Gospel of Luke, right? And there's an interesting parable that comes before Jesus gives that concluding statement, because to your point, Jesus was provocative. We're going to go into that in just a minute here. But I want you first to just unpack this commonly tossed about these days term, servant leadership. I think there's an incredible power in actually being a servant leader. It's, one of those maybe sound bites, maybe could even be used for some people to virtue signal about who and what they are. But for somebody who really believes it and practices it, it's powerful. So unpack that for us a little bit. What does it mean to be a servant leader? And how have you been a servant leader in your life and experiences?
Well, I was always a leader, but I was not always a servant leader. And you can make this as complicated as you want. I like to make things sound simple and be simple. So, from 0 to about 32 years of age, 35 years of age, until, God hit me over the head, I was a leader, and it was about me. Right. I was out for myself. It was my success. And I was really good at it. About every 2-3 years, new promotion, more money, bigger responsibility. So I was pretty good at it. And then I became a servant leader. And I realized that my success is really a byproduct of other people's success. And once I became the CEO, I said, I used to joke, look, I have the easiest job in the room, because all I have to do is get the right people on the team, make sure that everybody understands what the goals are, make sure we all share the same values, so we have the same culture, we have the same vision. And then I just have to equip everyone, every person on that team to make sure that they're successful. Now, how did I do that? I literally dedicated 4 hours of my time every month with every one of my direct reports. And it was an open table discussion. And it was like, okay, how do I support you? How do I make you successful? How do I make you, how can I help you achieve your goals? Is it a bigger budget you need? Is it more time from me do you need? What is it? And by the way, how are things going at home? Right. So it's really, serving each individual, serving your teams, because if they achieve their goals and they're successful, then you're a byproduct of it, and you're also successful, and your company is successful. So don't focus on yourself, focus on others, focus on your customers, focus on your suppliers, focus on your vendors, and make sure all that's all churning well, and make them successful. And then your company is successful. Forget about yourself. It's much bigger than you.
So when you hold up the book, The 4 Secrets or Keys, I forget the exact title, to success and so on, do those points, those keys, those principles help us get rid of that inherent, let's call it selfishness, or lack of selflessness, or inability or challenges to put the other's interests above our own, right? Because what you're saying is common sense in a way, but we would also call it uncommon sense, because people either don't really believe it or don't know how to do it.
Well, common sense is not so common, right? And really what happens, I think you and I were talking about this before, but it's really boils down to the individual's character and really knowing who you are. And those things get stressed under difficult circumstances. And these, the 4 or 5 keys that I talk about in the book, they are really simple concepts, but they're very difficult to implement because people are inherently selfish. And when push comes to shove and difficult times, and there's stress in the equation, maybe financial stress or relationship stress or other stress, then they kind of get away from those. So I always call, take some inventory of your values. I don't know what your values are, but take some good inventory of it. And there's a thing that's called your values and your integrity, and there's thing that's called your reputation. And if those two are lined up, you're okay. But a lot of times what happens is you believe you're a certain individual, you believe you exercise certain values, you believe you have, certain things that you stand for, and then stress happens and you act differently. And you develop a reputation, and your reputation may not line up with your character, and then you got a problem. But as long as your character lines up with your reputation, then I think you're doing a good job.
Yeah, I heard this statement, which to me rings true, which is we don't actually rise to the challenge. We sink to the level of our training, right? So the real us, what we're actually capable. Obviously there are many examples of rising to a challenge and one's better self. And I've seen that in my own self, but I've also seen the other, as you say, which is the worst side of myself comes out sometimes during periods of stress, right? So I'm going to now shift to the parable again, and I want to read this. We talked about this in the studio briefly before the show. People may think, well, Jesus spoke in parables to make the meaning clear. That's not actually true. He himself said that the meaning is hidden, right? And he spoke in parables so that, as Isaiah said, people would see but not see, hear but not hear. And I was just reading this quote I pulled off the internet describing this, which I think does it really well. Jesus spoke in parables to convey deeper spiritual truths in a way that was accessible to some while remaining hidden from others. This method allowed him to reveal insights to his disciples while concealing meaning from those who were not spiritually receptive. Now, God has his reasons for that, right? I think God leads horses to water, but he won't force them to drink. We have this thing called free will, right? And for God, the all-powerful, almighty, all-knowing creator of the universe, including time and space, who can issue forth prophecies, which is essentially history written in advance, telling the end from the beginning. Yet he still allows us to make our own choices and our own decisions. And part of that is that Jesus spoke in parables, which sometimes you have to dig into to really understand. You have to go to God and say, what the heck does this mean? So now this parable about you can't serve two masters, God and mammon, is part of something called the parable of the unjust steward in Luke chapter 16. The audience can look it up if you're not familiar with it. I'm just going to briefly skim over it and we'll talk about it. Jesus said to his disciples, there was a rich man who had a steward, and an accusation was brought to him that this man was wasting his goods. So he called him to him and said, what is this I hear about you? Give an account of your stewardship, for you can no longer be steward. Then the steward said within himself, what shall I do? For my master is taking this stewardship away from me. I cannot dig. I am ashamed to beg. Here's what I will do so that when I am put out of the stewardship, they may receive me into their houses. He called every one of his master's debtors to him and said to the first, how much do you owe my master? He said, 100 measures of oil. So he said to them, take your bill and sit down quickly and write 50. Then he said to another, how much do you owe? 100 measures of wheat. Take your bill and write 80. And then the master commended the unjust steward because he had dealt shrewdly. For the sons of this world are more shrewd in their generations than the sons of light. And then Jesus said, make friends for yourselves by this unrighteous mammon, so that when you fail, they may receive you into an everlasting home. He that is faithful in what is least is also faithful in much. He who is unjust in what is least is also unjust in much. So if you've been unfaithful in unrighteous mammon, who will commit to your trust the true riches? And if you have not been faithful in what is another's man's, who will give you what is your own? And that's when he says, no man can serve two masters. So it's kind of this strange situation about ethics and justice. And again, Jesus spoke in such a way that the meaning was often hidden. Tom, what's your take on this?
Well, two thoughts. First of all,
not to put you on the spot, by the way.
Only Jesus knows what he said. I mean, I have no idea why Jesus said that parable. All we can do is we can read the word and interpret it. Jesus knew why he said it. Some parables he actually explains, why he said it and what's the meaning behind it. On this one, he just says it, and it's kind of, take a shot at it. And if I kind of read through the lines, I think what he was saying was to form relationships. Now, the way I think the parable said, you can argue that the way they formed the relationships wasn't the most ethical because you were kind of, falsifying invoices. So I certainly wouldn't condone that. But I think he said, look, form relationships because when it's time and you are no longer in that job, you're going to need those relationships going forward. And I think also for us, the lesson is form relationships with Jesus, form relationships with your faith, because, just like that individual, he was out of a job. I mean, pretty soon we're going to be out of this world and we're going to be going on to the next world. So if you don't form those alliances, if you don't form those relationships, you're not going to get to next step. I mean, if you don't believe in Jesus and you haven't accepted Jesus as your savior, you're not going on to the next step. I don't care, how many good deeds you do. That's just our faith. That's my faith. That's your faith. That's the Christian faith. So, form those relationships and, make sure that Jesus is your savior. So when it's time to go on to the next world, then you're secure that you will get there. That's how I interpret it. Now, I don't know, maybe I'm wrong, but that's what it means to me.
Yeah, it's a difficult one. It's a complex one. And to your point, he doesn't fully understand it. Verse 14, after he then says nobody can serve two masters, he says the Pharisees, who were lovers of money, also heard these things, and they derided him. They made fun of him. And he said to them, you are those who justify yourselves before men, but God knows your hearts. For what is highly esteemed among men is an abomination in the sight of God. So he was.
We have CPR time.
Close the door.
Okay. No need to be rude.
Sorry about that. Little interruption.
It's okay. Life intrudes. Sometimes my daughter's cat jumps up in my lap and starts meowing during these shows. Always fun. So the point I guess that I'm making here is that these parables are complex. Jesus was also walking a fine line. There were those who were accusing him. In one sense, maybe, and this is just me talking, I'm not attempting to give a definitive answer here, but maybe he was in some sense also referring to himself, because he was being accused, right? He was being accused of, cavorting with sinners, right? He was being accused of forgiving sins. Who gave you the right to forgive, your sins? I do not condemn you. Go and sin no more, right? Jesus was walking a razor's edge himself, and he, used these parables to appeal to those who were really seeking spiritual discernment, while again making the meaning unclear for those who might twist his words and make something out of them that they were not, or not intended to be. I'm actually reminded off the cuff of the faith chapter, right? Hebrews chapter 6. He that would come to God must believe that God is. So you can't force God to prove himself scientifically. You can't demand that God show himself to you. God says, if you want to come to me, then believe in me. It is a matter of faith. But not only that, you must believe that he is, and that he is a rewarder of those who diligently seek him. So you have to, like Jacob, then wrestle with God, right? Wrestle with what this proverb means, this parable means. Wrestle with, the meaning of our lives and success. And, as you did in Budapest when you submitted to God and became a servant leader, right? So we're going to go now to another commercial break. But when we come back, I want to talk to you a little bit about your work now, and what you're doing to help people, and what the world is teaching you at this stage in your life. So don't go anywhere. We'll be right back with more of former Fortune 500 CEO Tom Kereszti and a Bible-based style of leadership. Welcome back. After that little word from one of our sponsors, we're here with Tom Kereszti in the studio talking about Bible-based leadership. We were talking about the parables of Jesus and spirit-led servant leadership. So Tom, tell us a little bit about how you concluded your career as a CEO and what you're up to now and what you're involved in and how you're helping people today.
Well, the way I concluded my career on what I call W-2, where I worked for an organization, is I reached my level of incompetence, as I say, right? I was CEO of a $400 million company, so that was kind of, my level of incompetence. I knew I was never going to be a CEO of General Electric or, Nike or whatever. So I said, okay, well, now it's time to do the next phase of my life. So I had a couple of businesses that I ran, and probably since 2005 or six, I was thinking, okay, what's my next step? And I knew it was going to be something faith-based. And I looked at C12 and Convene and some other, franchise opportunities. All my life, I was really involved. Well, not all my life, but since '95, it was always business and Christian business. So that was kind of a niche that I was in when I was overseas. Church was always part of that stable, school, church, and work. And at church, we always had business guys get together. So we always talked about business and had Bible studies with business. So that was really the avenue that I went down on. So when it was time to go to the next step, I said, okay, what am I going to do? And Convene in C12 just didn't seem right to me. So I joined the John Maxwell organization. And John Maxwell, as you know, was a preacher at one time. And then became a preacher. His pulpit became really the business market. So it was his business market ministry. So that's what I've been doing since I would say 2005. I'm part of the John Maxwell organization. I'm certified by John Maxwell Leadership, and I work with organizations using those biblical principles. And if you read my book, I think you'll find some parallels with a lot of John's books. So that's what I've been doing and trying to give back. I collected a lot of knowledge over the years. I made a lot of mistakes, and people always say, look, don't learn from your own mistakes, learn from somebody else's mistakes. It's much less painful. So
Well, thank you. I'd like to bring up a couple of contrasting thoughts here from the Bible, right? One is that Jesus said, lay up treasure in heaven, right? This is commonly known, so there's a strain in religion. There's a strain or a thread, an idea that permeates a lot of religions, especially maybe in this country, Christian religions. I remember growing up and having this idea that somehow if I was materially successful, that would be bad. That would be wrong, right? There would be some evil in it. If I were, to be just a money grubbing, greedy person seeking to enrich myself, God would not be happy because of statements like, don't lay up treasure here on earth where thieves will steal, iron will rust, and moths will corrupt it. Lay up treasure in heaven. But then there are other parables, right? Like the parable of the talents, where Jesus distributed talents to some of his servants. One man he gave 1 talent to, another one he gave 5, and another one he gave 10 to. And the man who had 10 doubled it, came back with 20, and talent being an amount of gold, right? A capital investment. He gave capital to these servants and said, go invest it, go turn this into something better, more. The one that had 5 came back and he had doubled his, and he was commended. Well done, thou good and faithful servant. But the one who had 1 talent went and buried his in a napkin. And when the master came and said, well, what did you do with it? He said, here it is. I kept it safe for you. And he's like, you unprofitable servant, you should have at least lent it out and gotten some interest, or you should have done something with it. What happened? He said, well, basically I was afraid because I heard that you were a stern master, reaping where you didn't sow, and blah, blah, blah. And so I wanted to make sure that you had what was yours. And then Jesus in this parable says, yes, that's true. I am that man. Therefore, you should have done this. Take that 1 talent from him and give it to the one who had 10. And the people complained and said, "What? How can you do that? How can you take that away from the one who has the least and give it to the one who has the most?" And Jesus said, "Unto him that hath will be given, and unto him that doesn't have, even that which he has will be taken away." Therefore, basically, apply apply principles of good stewardship, and your Father in heaven will be happy. Right? So, Tom, what do you make of these two contrasting parables of, don't lay up treasure here, lay it up in heaven, and at the same time, these practical principles of how to take capital, invest it, and give a return on investment?
Well, two thoughts. First of all, you should not be a happy individual if you store everything up for yourself. So, never mind what the Bible says. If you're just kind of hoarding everything, that's not healthy. I mean, if you go into a hoarder's house and there's crap everywhere, that's just not a healthy situation. So you should not be, proud of happy with hoarding stuff, because it's not unhealthy. Regarding the talents, I think I've heard other people say, and I agree with that approach is, forget the money. Forget, the capitalism portion of it. Look at yourself and see how you've been blessed with what talents. And, let's say there's three individuals and they are great athletes. All three of them are great athletes. But one of the guys, he sits on a couch and watches TV and eats potato chips all the time. Right? He's not really using the talents that he was blessed with. The other two guys are, working out and they're athletes, and, one is maybe a lot more disciplined than the other, maybe a lot more successful, and maybe gets to the Olympics, while the other one only gets to, local track meets or something. But look at yourself, look at the talents that, God gave you, and what are you doing with those talents? Never mind the money, never mind the, the capitalism portion of it. Look at your talents, and we talk about, people's gifts or people's talents, and, what are your talents? And my talents are, I understand culture and I understand leadership. That's my talents, and that's what I'm putting to good use and hopefully getting a return. Not really for myself, but getting a return for organizations, getting a return for people, in improving their lives and improving organizations. That's how I'm using my talents. So that's really the way I would interpret it.
Thank you. So any other sort of concluding thoughts on this section in the parables of Jesus about where he so often used physical material examples before we go on to some of the audience comments?
No, like I said, Jesus said what he said, and I have no idea why he said it. I can just comment on what it means to me.
Yep. So here's one of the comments, and I'll just pick a couple here from Grace Ellis. Money isn't evil; it's your relationship with money. So, Tom, what's your relationship with money, and what's your take on this?
Yeah, I think it's that statement from what is it, Grace? Yeah, Grace,
Yep.
You're 100% correct. Money's not evil; it's how you use it. If you're not blessed, you can't bless others, right? So if you're using your money for self-gain, and you're not blessing others with it, there's all kinds of biblical verbiage. Don't be a reservoir, be a river, etc. So don't be ashamed of financial success, but don't hoard financial success. May you be a blessing to others.
Yeah, we mentioned at the beginning that I think it's springtime, right outside the window here. It's exploding with life, and God reveals himself as raining on the just and the unjust alike, right? You put seeds in the ground, they're going to grow, right? You take care of a little plot of land, it's going to produce, because God provides the rain, the sunshine, the seasons, the earth, the processes, that anyone can tap into, anyone can take advantage of. And ultimately, God does grant the growth and the produce. Whereas, of course, we have to do our part. But that generosity is what I'm reflecting on right now. It doesn't matter who you are. Doesn't matter what you believe. Doesn't matter what you've done. The fairness and the justice of God and the generosity and the mercy of God. It's just amazing, right? So here's a
And
couple
by
of
the way,
questions.
you can be very generous. You don't just have to be generous with money, right? I'm very generous with my time. So I spend a lot of time on faith-based activities. I coach people for free that want to be coached, and I'm happy to mentor them, do for free, because I want to invest in them. So generosity doesn't have to be just financial generosity. You can be very generous with your time.
So that kind of answers this follow-on question from Grace. Do you sell to businesses or primarily individuals?
But what do you mean by sell?
Well,
I guess we're all in sales. And I'll answer that question that, look, I don't seek out individuals. Like I said, I know people that would like my help, and I'm willing to help them. In fact, I do it for gratis. And those are people usually that are part of my inner circle, in a faith-based inner circle. But my clients are businesses, they're organizations. Now, ultimately, what happens is we work with an organization on organizational culture. That may be, that organization may identify one or two individuals in their executives teams that need some coaching. So then in those cases, as part of the big package, we'll also work with one or two individuals to get them to the next level. I don't know if
so
that answers the question.
yeah, follow-on question from Benjamin. Do you lead with Jesus or bring it up early in your introduction with clients?
I am of the opinion that you don't need to talk about Jesus. Jesus should be glowing through you, through your actions. Um, I share this story because it's kind of a funny story. I had this individual say something to me, and this individual was pretty, I would say, not an integrity-based individual. So his reputation and his character didn't kind of match up. So he said to me something, and I said, "I'm sorry, I can't hear you." So he said it louder. I said, I made believe I still couldn't hear him. Third time, he said it even louder. And I finally turned to him. I said, "Look, I can't hear your words because your actions are so loud." Right? So I think we make the mistake. We say, "Okay, we got to lead with Jesus. We got to talk about Jesus." Talk about Jesus through your actions. Otherwise you're kind of just like a Pharisee. You're out there doing the same things, and you're saying all these wonderful prayers so everybody can hear, say the prayers. Nah, forget about that, at least in my humble opinion, and focus on your actions. And through your actions, people say, "Hey, there's something different about Tom. I don't know what it is, but I like it. I want some more of it." And after you build that relationship, then you talk about Jesus. If you lead with Jesus, you're going to alienate people, or you could potentially, because people are going to say, "Well, maybe your actions are not really as what you're talking about, and maybe I don't want a piece of that."
Thank you. I'll take this one real quick. What section of the Bible are the parables? These Jesus spoke in parables. They're kind of unique to the Gospels of Jesus. So Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John are where you have the discussion of the parables. A little bit like the Proverbs being much shorter sound bites, but also thought provocative. So here's a proverb about what you were just saying, Tom. Jesus said, "Be the light of the world." He didn't say, "Be the loudspeaker of the world," right? The best sermon is your example. Somebody else put something in here that I liked. See if I can find it here. Here it is. Oliver wrote in, hire for character, fire for the lack of it. I don't know if you've heard that. Did you ever have to take actions like that? Circumstances, situations, how did you deal with those challenges when you were a rising executive and CEO?
Well, two comments. The first one is a friend of mine said this, so I'll just quote him. He said, "We hire for people for what they know, and then we fire for people for who they are." Right? I think that is so true. So I think in all my career, I probably only had to physically take action and fire two people individually. Other people kind of hung themselves. I think, I gave people enough rope. I gave people enough chances that when it's time to come to to termination, nobody was really surprised. Right. And it was really only two instances that I can remember where, somebody just did something really ethically bad where I had to fire them, where it was a kind of surprise for everybody. But most of the time, people fire themselves. You don't have to fire them.
So here's here's a question from Planksip, one of our partner organizations. I'd love to learn more about the organization you're a part of. I think it's the Maxwell, or is it maybe your own leadership development company?
Well, Maxwell Leadership is a global organization. That's probably about 50,000 people in the Maxwell Global Organization. So I license and I use a lot of John Maxwell's materials, but I also have a lot of my own materials. So I have my own book for culture. I have a very good friend, Kyle. He's a retired Navy SEAL. Him and Chris have a book out called Leadership is Overrated. So I'm almost like I'm playing both sides of the fence, if I may put it that way. Organizational cultures are essential for healthy organizations, as is leadership. Leadership is also essential for organizations. But what happens is if you have bad leaders at the top, a healthy organizational culture can survive it. If you don't have a healthy organizational culture and you get a bad leader, then everything falls apart. But if you have a healthy organization and you have leadership inside the organization, irregardless of what happens at the top, that organization will survive. Now, it's also equally important that you have good leadership that allows that organizational culture to cultivate. So when a bad leader comes around, that organization still survives. So if there's an organizational culture challenge, then usually we go with a company called Culture Force. If there's a leadership challenge, I use more of the Maxwell leadership model, and I use Leadership Disciples. Those are the two companies. And I'm not sure if that makes sense to you guys.
I think it's a great introduction for those who would like to. How would they get a hold of you if they want to know more?
I am blessed and cursed with the last name. So just look on that screen. If you go to LinkedIn or Google Kereszti, I'm the guy that pops up. Maybe my sister was a retired doctor, maybe my two daughters. But go to LinkedIn, look at Tom Kereszti, and that is the easiest way to find me. I'm the only one out there.
Well, we have that in common. My name doesn't sound that unusual, but there's nowhere for me to hide. I'm the only one in the Googleverse. So I've just put that in the chat. People can get a hold of Tom Kereszti. He's very personable, a pleasure, a joy to talk to. Strongly recommend if you have any interest or know somebody who could benefit from this. Tom, last question from me before we go to the sneak peek and before we go to your final words and the sneak peek. So what is the job number one of a leader? What is the number one priority and focus of a good leader, a servant leader, a Bible-based leader?
I said it before, I'll say it again. It's not about you. If you think it's about you, you're not a servant leader, and you're probably not a good leader. If it's something about much bigger than you, and hopefully, at least for this audience, the much bigger than you is about Jesus and whole Christian walk. But even if you're not a faith-based guy, even if you're just a secular guy, As long as you understand it's not about you, but it's a mission much bigger than you, then you're okay. Then you're a good leader.
Yeah, that does sum it up, right? Let this mind be in you, which was in Christ Jesus. Basically, esteem others better than yourself, and exist to serve others. Tom, thank you for joining us in the studio today. What final thoughts would you like to leave with our audience today?
Look, Jesus said, "What is the two?" Or you know, when the Pharisees asked Jesus, "Rabbi, what is the two most important commandments?" He said, "Well, love your God with all your might, all your heart, and all your soul. And the second, the most important, and just as equally important, is love your neighbor like yourself." And if you take that philosophy into your workplace, then I think you've got the beginnings of becoming a successful leader. Because you want to treat other people like yourself, you want to love other people like yourself, which means Jesus was a servant. So if you use that example, you'll be a good leader.
Wonderful. Well, thank you, Tom. Really appreciate you taking the time to share with the audience today. And we'll
Thank you.
Hopefully be following you and checking out the great things that you're doing. We're going to go now to the sneak peek for next week. Another servant leader in their own way, in a different field. This will be us signing off, and we'll leave you with the sneak peek for next week, episode number, what are we at now? 150, a milestone on Created in the Image of God. Thank you so much, Tom. And God bless. And
God bless everyone that's listening and watching. God bless you all.
Thank you. And so stay tuned for the sneak peek, and we'll see you all next week. Hello, everyone. It's Wade Franson back with another sneak peek for Created in the Image of God, Building Vibrant Communities. I have just an amazing guest here with me in the studio, recording a sneak peek for episode number 150, airing on May 13th. This person is Sylvie Beljanski, who is carrying on the legacy of her father, Mirko Beljanski. And she's written a book called Winning the War on Cancer, the epic journey toward a natural cure. Welcome to the studio, Sylvie.
Hello, and thank you for having me.
It's such a pleasure. And I know the audience is going to be just amazed at the story behind your foundation. Going back to your father, who immigrated to Paris and was a respected, you tell the story. What was he respected for in those early years?
Well, my father was a PhD in molecular biology. We are speaking now of he got his PhD in 51, I believe. So, and then he joined the Pasteur Institute in France, which is the French equivalent of NIH. He was one of the first scientists to look at the environment as a cause, but also as a solution to disease. And that put him at the forefront of cancer research and a natural approach to cancer research, which was something unheard of at the time. And he published 133 peer-reviewed papers. He was very charismatic. He was very much appreciated by his peers. And he worked with a number of doctors who had extremely good results with this approach. However, that put him in collision course with the French government, and the backlash was kind of terrible. We are speaking here of a SWAT team that came to destroy him, destroy his laboratory, try to destroy every evidence of this groundbreaking research. And it's only because there was a second generation willing, able to understand at the right moment, at the right place, that this knowledge was able to survive and to come here now to the 21st century, continue to help people.
Is it safe to say that part of the reason he was attacked was that he dared to take his theoretical research and apply it in practical terms to actually help individuals? So much so that the president at the time, François Mitterrand, a very famous leader in Europe, received assistance from him that actually helped him, but the medical establishment, of course, couldn't have this alternative approach gaining the light of day and being successful as an alternative to what we here in the US can call the medical industrial complex.
Absolutely. Indeed, my father was not a doctor and he never treated patients by himself. He always worked in conjunction with an array of doctors who loved what my father had developed and were implementing those plant extracts to their practice. And indeed, that's how the word came to François Mitterrand, that there were little plant extracts that could make a difference. The official of course, did not want to hear anything about it, but Mitterrand had a mistress. This is a French story. And Mitterrand started to take the products and against all odds started to get better and better. He was able to finish his second term. And it's only after Mitterrand passed away that the pharmaceutical big business decided that they would not allow natural compounds to do better than synthetic official drugs. And they came down to the laboratory with machine guns, with dogs. I mean, an incredible show to intimidate and destroy.
Well, there you have it. That's a wrap on the sneak peek for today. We're not going down some rabbit hole conspiracy here. This is public knowledge. We're going back into history to unpack it and explore how that happened, what Sylvie is doing today, how her foundation is doing an amazing work in education and changing practices. And we'll also see the applications for today and what we should be learning from this. So you're not going to want to miss Created in the Image of God, episode 150 on May 13th, 8 p.m. We'll see you there.